Cinema Podcast.
You haven't aged a day, Booker.
Trust me, I have.
So how old are you?
Too old.
All right, welcome everybody back to another episode of the Cult Cinema Podcast. This is episode 21, and it's a little different this month. This month for February, right? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Wait? Yes.
For February.
Yes,
Yep.
We're recording in January, but these will be released in February. We are talking about The Old Guard.
Yes.
And we're going to be, these next couple episodes, we're going to be discussing movies that we feel will be considered cult classics in the future. And this was Ashley's pick for this week. And it's pretty good. I mean, it came out in 2020, so about a year and a half ago. Directed by Gina Price Bythewood.
Yeah, and just an odd side note, February is Black History Month. I hope we have some African American listeners. I didn't pick her because she's black, but I realized as going through her history and her directing stuff, she's black. So this fits perfectly there too.
And apparently she is the first African American woman to direct a big budget, quote unquote, superhero movie. What this is basically is. It was funny. I was watching this movie and I was like, I feel like this would be a really good concept for a comic book or graphic novel.
Yeah.
And of course, as soon as I see the credits, it's like based on the graphic novel series by, Greg Rucka?
I wrote his name down.
Yeah.
I'll repeat it too. Yeah.
But he also wrote the screenplay for this movie as well and was a consultant on it. So I think that's always really cool when they're able to get the original creator on board for the production of a live action adaptation of their work.
Agreed.
So, but yeah. So I really enjoyed this movie too.
Good.
I mean, I thought it was good. It is interesting that, having a movie like this that's adapted by a comic book, just like you were saying, like it was only released on Netflix and it did not have like a big theatrical release. But then again, I mean, there is The Witcher, which is a huge, it was a book series and a video game series, and then that got its own just Netflix series, but is doing really well. But it seems like the Old Guard kind of had already an existing kind of cult following behind it with the graphic novel series. So,
Right. It is not a well-known novel series. I didn't know either, and I definitely just watched it on Netflix and then saw it on the credits too. And then I did some digging on the actual novels and how many there are. There are 7, I think.
Yeah, it's like a miniseries.
Yeah, so agreed. I think that's a great adaptation.
For sure.
And I love this movie. Like I was saying earlier, it's definitely made it into my top 10 now. I've probably seen it 10 times, including this watch. I love the characters. I love the story. I love that we are looking at an immortal, but we're not looking at an immortal as in a monster. So it's not a vampire, werewolf, something like that. And as we'll get into it, they're not technically immortal. Right. So I just think it's a really cool concept, an original concept. And it did do well initially for streaming.
I think I saw something. It was like somewhere between 72 and 78 million households streamed it within the first month of release. But I also saw something where like Netflix came out and said was like, well, we honestly don't even know if these are good numbers or not. So, because it's hard to determine how, like, if a movie kind of made its money back or made any money just if it's released strictly on streaming platforms, because there's not there's not like ticket sales to go off of or anything like that. That it normally,
Yeah, you just don't know. And Charlize Theron has said in a few interviews, this is her first streaming only. And she was also leery. She didn't know if this was going to do well. Right. If she would know it would do well. So
I think she's perfectly cast to play someone who's immortal, though, because she has not aged at all in the past, like, 25 years.
She looks amazing still.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think every character choice for this movie was perfectly cast. I can't imagine a single person who I could be like, that would have worked too. Yeah,
and we get, what's his name, Harry Melling as the villain, who is also known as playing the cousin Dudley in Harry Potter. He's just known for being really good at playing a total piece of shit.
Again,
so
can't imagine a different villain. I can't at all.
Yeah, but so here we are. I'm ready to get into the scene by scene when you are.
All right, yes, let's get into it. So like you said, Old Guard from 2020, and it came out during quarantine. Probably a good reason why it did pretty well streaming, if those numbers are to be believed.
Yeah.
Another female director. I'm so happy we're pulling in a lot of these female directors. I think it's awesome. So starring, obviously, most notably, Charlize Theron. And also Matthias, I will pronounce his last name wrong, so I'm not even going to attempt it. He plays Booker. He's also hey, it's that guy. He's in a ton of stuff.
He looks familiar, but I didn't look up his IMDb or anything. What else has he been in?
He's in Red Sparrow. He was in another HBO series, not Rome, but like one of those type of series.
Okay.
He is a German actor, I think.
I know he plays French in the movie.
He might. I don't know. Honestly, I can't remember. I would have to look it up, but I have seen him in a bunch of stuff. So both those two characters I'm very familiar with. Everybody else, never seen him before.
Yeah.
Ever. So.
Well, there was the guy who plays Copley or Copley. He's been in other stuff.
Yeah.
I forget
You're right.
his name, though.
That guy, too. Yeah, I forget his name, too. I did not write down his actual name. But you're right. Again, just haven't really seen the characters in anything else. Again, nonetheless, their performances are amazing in this film. We begin with kind of an ominous bunch of bullets, and we see dead bodies laying on the ground. Charlize Theron's face first, of course. And her voice starts narrating over this scene, and she basically is just describing how she's so tired of this. It's over and over, the same situation, that this could be it, but it never is, and she always wakes up.
Apparently this opening narration is pretty much pulled straight from the first graphic novel as well.
It is a line-for-line
Yeah.
narration.
And a lot of the dialogue from this film supposedly is directly from the comic, which, is good if you're trying to say true to the source material, but I'm sure, having the actual writer of the comic on set to, and writing the screenplay, it makes sense that it would be, word for word.
Yeah. And I think the script is also beautifully written. Again, it's not just the characters that are developed so well in this movie. It is the script. The script is strong. And like you said, pulling that from the comics itself is obviously very helpful to fill those gaps, I'm sure.
There is one thing that I wish they would have done a little bit differently. And sorry, I don't mean to stall too much before we get into the scene by scene. But when they have a lot of flashbacks, because these Immortals, some of them run around for, somewhere between hundreds and thousands of years. But when they have flashbacks, they all talk like normal English that we would talk today. I think it would have been a little bit more interesting that in those flashbacks, they, speak either a language, like a different language that's more on par with like where they were at in that point in time, because even if they are speaking English, hundreds of thousands of years ago, the way that people speak English has changed over time. I mean, you look at Shakespeare and the way that like Old English, like it's very different than how we talk today. So I would have liked to see like them adjust that a little bit more. I think that would have brought a little bit more realism to it. I mean, we're talking about a movie about people who can't die, but I feel like that would have, I don't know. Maybe I'm just being nitpicky, but I think it would have been a little bit more interesting.
Well, Joe and Nikki do. They speak in their flashbacks in their native language. They speak it to each other.
Right. That's true.
So there's that. But yes, I agree. Obviously, like we were saying, Booker is French. Andy, who the fuck knows where she's from.
Right.
She definitely would not have been speaking English, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So.
I don't think they actually say it in the movie how old she is, but I looked it up. I guess based on the comics, she's over 6,000 years old.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Imagine. Okay, we'll get into that later. We'll get into that in some of my fun facts about the time, for sure. So after that scene, we cut to really pretty shots of Morocco. And Andy is walking down a corridor. We kind of see this in tandem with a man on a motorcycle who we'll soon know is Booker. They eventually kind of meet up at a corner, and smile at each other. And she has a present for him. It's a first edition Don Quixote, which I'm sure she either already had or,
so
she has time to barter for something like that.
I saw something where there is like some symbolism behind the fact that she gives him a copy of Don Quixote, because I don't know too much about the story of Don Quixote, but I guess supposedly it's, the story of a man who kind of traveled around trying to do, fighting for what he believed was right, even though it ended up just being like, an old fool kind of just wasting his time kind of thing. And so that's supposed to symbolize how, Charlize Theron's character Andy has been around forever, trying to do what she believes is right and protecting the world. But, 6,000 years later, and she feels like the world is only getting worse and that it's just been a colossal waste of time. So,
yeah. No, I think the book symbolism is definitely there. You're right. All of what you said is right. And Don Quixote was also one of the first people that you kind of look to as a philosopher, somebody who formed a lot of standard views on a lot of certain things. His books are obviously loved all over the world. So, yeah, again. But I think in this instance, the only reason she has the book is because Booker collects the books.
Yeah.
That's why his name is Booker. Yeah. He's not, it's not a nickname for his name. His name is very French. And there's nothing Booker about the name. He collects the books, and hence the nickname. She does ask him, though, why she is here. He explains it's a job for a CIA contact of his and tells her where they're kind of needed. She really is insisting that this isn't a good idea, though, because this would be a repeat job, and that's dangerous for them to do anything in a second location or in a location twice.
Right.
She asks if Joe and Nikki are here and on board, and he nods. So she kind of reluctantly is like, fine, we'll hear this guy out. We'll see what's going on. They end up at a hotel to check in. And again, kind of tying back to how old they are, they speak every language that you could think of over all these years. So Booker has no issue communicating with the desk clerk and booking these rooms and stuff. We then kind of pan over and we see a television in the lobby. And it's speaking about unrest in Haiti and how, people have died during these protests. They pull in these little things in this movie, again, about that doom and gloom. Nothing's getting better. Nobody's really doing any good in the world. So this is kind of our first glimpse of that. Just then we see a group of women take a selfie, and Andy had turned just as they snapped the picture. So to avoid, again, a trail, she goes over, asks them if she can take one for them, and then deletes the photo and retakes it. You see this a lot, too. They try to cover their tracks as much as possible. Obviously, if you're seeing someone over time, over hundreds of years, that would look weird in photos, wherever they're popping up. They eventually arrive up into the room, though, and Andy first hugs Nikki, and then she hugs Joe. They are all very close. You can tell through this entire film their relationship is not only emotionally close to each other, it's even closer than I think some families probably would be, strictly based on how long they've been together. I think. Yeah. Nikki tells Andy that he has a present for her. She smells it, and it's baklava. Nikki then tells Booker $500, lay it all out, and they all laugh. And Andy initially protests, but this is a fun game that they've played, obviously, over these years. And it's a guessing game. And she has 5 times to name where this particular dessert came from. Because baklava is not... It is a dessert. It's all around the world. But it can be made in different sections of the world.
Right.
With different ingredients. So she's just got, 5 guesses to go. So Booker and Joe both take the bet. Joe is actually betting that she can get it. Booker's betting she can't. So, of course, she guesses them all.
I think it's the other way around. I think because Booker ends up taking all the money.
Oh, does he?
Yeah.
I thought Joe took the money.
Yeah. No.
My bad. Other way, then. Either way, after the guesses, they all, laugh and stuff. So Joe then says, "Admit it, boss, you've missed us." And she definitely agrees. Booker then starts explaining the job that they're here for and kind of looks at Andy and says they could do some good. And she is like, have you been looking at the news? Nobody's doing any good out there. So we're not going to do anything, but, you know.
And the group has also taken like a year hiatus, just because, I mean, spending thousands of years trying to defeat evil from the world, I'm sure it can be very exhausting. So
Sure. Yeah. And again, even though their relationships are so close, I have to imagine at some point you need some alone time.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Andy did. She was alone for a year, took a year. And she's clearly not thrilled to be back here. Not that she isn't happy to see these three men. It's working again, I think, is she's dreading.
Yeah.
She says, all right, we'll hear this guy out. So they then go and meet Agent Copley. He is British, though. And Andy initially is like, how are you in the CIA if you're British? Because this doesn't compute. Also, why did you leave the agency? And he explains that his wife got sick and unfortunately passed a couple years ago, and he just hasn't really found his way back. She apologizes for his loss, though. She has empathy. And even as much of a hardened person they try to make Andy out to be, she does have a lot of empathy in her. Copley then explains this is a job rescuing essentially a bunch of kidnapped girls. These hostages, or they've taken them hostage, so we're just trying to extract them before they move them, basically. He does confirm they're still on site and, you know, stresses the urgency of this needing to be done quickly. Nikki, though, we kind of see after their conversation, he is perched maybe in the room that they were in, but he's across the street with a sniper, and we just see Copley wave at him, which I thought was kind of cool that I thought maybe that should have been red flag number one.
Yeah.
How did he know he would be there?
Well, I mean, he's ex-CIA. I'm sure he's run into situations similar to this where, I don't know.
Fair, but if I was Nikki, I probably would have been like, did he do some background on us? Does he know that I do this? You know, maybe ask a question or two like that, but that's just me, where my brain went.
Well, Copley's also like, when he talks about like, you know, your team, he says your team is the best I've ever seen. So he must know that, you know, they probably have some kind of backup, meeting a former CIA agent in the middle of Morocco for some mission that.
Yeah, could be. They just make it seem later
Right.
that that's not the case.
Yeah.
So I was just like, this is weird. Maybe some stuff just got lost in translation there. We cut to them all flying in a chopper. They get dropped off, of course, outside of this compound they're supposed to be breaching, I guess you want to say. I love their weapons in this movie, too. I think it's so cool how they mix in modern and old weapons, including, and most notably, a 14th century halberd that Andy carries, which is similar to a battle axe, but it is specific to a part of the world, and I'll get into that more in fun facts. So they pass some women as they are walking to where they need to be, and they're carrying water. If you're not familiar with some African tribes and some native tribes, they don't have running water, so they have to literally carry baskets with buckets in it on their head to and from water. Nikki tells them, peace be with you, again, speaking all of the languages, so he's fine there. We then cut to Nightfall, and I don't know if they waited until Nightfall or if it took them that long to get there and it was Nightfall.
Right.
But either way.
That or they were just waiting. They got there while it was still light out, and they were like, nah, we should probably hide in the bushes until it gets dark.
I'm going to go with that. That's what happened. That makes more like stealthy sense to me. We can see the compound is clearly guarded, though. And we quickly see the entire team take out the surrounding security. They gain access to the building. They are obviously stealthy, very quiet. They take everyone down their path, too, of course. They then pass what looks like tons of shoes, little girls' shoes, which is disgusting if you think about it. And just as they get into what would obviously be the main holding room, after blowing the door open so that they assume that whoever was inside would hear them, so they're ready and armed. But it's pitch black and no one is there. We immediately get hit with floodlights, and they are all fucking mowed down with bullets. I don't even know how many bullets you want to try to count, but thousands of bullets.
Yeah.
Overkill. Very much overkill. But just then Andy says motherfucker before they start shooting, so she immediately knows this is a setup.
Yeah.
The men then approach all the bodies. They kind of kick them, check for vitals, and announce the room is clear. We then start to see the first real
regeneration.
I don't know what you want to call it. Sure, let's go with that. Regeneration. Bullets are literally coming out of their bodies, and they all start to breathe again, pretty much on at the same time.
I always thought that the regenerations looked pretty solid. They did use a combination of prosthetics for reference. They had some prosthetics on them for reference for some things, and then kind of did some cleanup with VFX. There's a later scene where you see that Booker just has his entire stomach just blown out. It was a prosthetic with a green pad underneath it, so that way they had some reference to use for when they digitally made it so that you could see all the guts kind of squirming around and everything. It looks really solid.
Yeah. I would say all the effects in this movie are 100% on point for sure.
It's also it's not too gory. It is, very actiony. It does get very violent, but it's not over the top.
Right.
So it's nice. It's not too ridiculous. It's even though it's a superhero movie to some extent, it's not too ridiculous.
No, it's not. I think what is interesting too to also know, they're immortal, but they feel the pain. Yeah. So I can't imagine. I'm sure they're in tons of situations for probably years and years where they don't get hurt, maybe, depending on the century, because bullets are bullets. If it hits you, it hits you. But maybe before guns were invented, they could get away with not being really hurt. But oh my God, I just can't imagine reliving that pain constantly. I guess your brain would probably condition itself.
Sure.
So it's bearable to an extent, but I just fucking can't imagine.
For sure.
So they all slowly get up, and obviously the other dudes in the room start freaking out. But then they start killing every single one of these dudes. Yeah. And I will also say the fight scenes and the kills.
The choreography is amazing. Yeah.
Amazing. It's like art. It's like a very beautifully scripted dance.
For sure.
They're
cutting
people's heads
off.
Right.
These are warriors that have been around for, some of them almost as long as literally older than dirt. But yeah. And so you would, I'm trying to find the right wording for it. But they clearly have the experience, and they're just able to single-handedly just wipe out an entire room of goons. And Charlize Theron does this on multiple occasions.
Yes. Yes. And they are all killing so it's 4 of them killing, 20 people maybe? Yeah. So I also want to note the choreography, yes, of course, but the way they work in tandem using their weapons. So there's a very particular spot in this one I'll point out, and in the next one when they're all fighting together at the end that I want to point out. Joe goes to, he holds up his gun, he's shooting. Then he immediately takes Andy by the arm. She flings around and knocks a guy with her axe right in the throat. Yeah. And just the tandem, the working together, it's fucking great. Yeah. It just looks so great. So obviously they kill everybody in the room. They all look up and they do see small cameras in the corner. And now they all realize they were set up, and they're all fucking pissed. Yeah. And there were never any girls, obviously. So that's also very shitty to pull into the whole mix. Andy then kills all the cameras, and we see Copley at his desk. He was the one recording them, and he set them up. We cut to morning. They're all burying their bloody-ass clothes. Obviously, they know immediately it was Copley. Andy's pissed and just keeps saying that, look, the world's not getting any better, and this was bound to happen. This is why I always say no second jobs. We just probably could have avoided this by not working with this person in general. And then this is when Booker is apologizing and says, I vetted him, I've worked with him before, so it's off that he would do this. So again, just that weird disconnect. She says after that, we're going to hunt him down, get rid of him because he knows our secret. And then honestly, the world can burn for all I care. I'm out. I'm done doing this. We then immediately cut to Afghanistan, clearly during, war.
Right.
And we see some female soldiers. They're passing out candy to some of the children in the village. Sergeant calls over Freeman, who will learn quickly her name is Nile, and tells her and her team to go talk to the women across the corridor. They are looking for a particular man, so they want to know if the women know where he is gone or if he's there. We then see Nile approaching the women, all the women soldiers as well. She does speak some Arabic. She's trying to be respectful. First, the woman says they don't know who this man is. She does show them a picture. But then one woman eventually alludes to a doorway. She looks over at it. They try to pretend that they're about to leave and try to get all the women to start moving out just before they breach this doorway. But they do get shot at right before that happens. Luckily, no one's standing in the doorway, but they do know the bad guys behind it at this point. Niall enters first and does shoot the guy. And just before he dies, she tries to save him because they need him. They need him alive. But again, right before he dies, he reaches up and slices her neck with a little knife he had hidden somewhere. And he gets her right in the jugular. So she is going to die anyway. And we do see her die. She succumbs to that injury. We then see Andy and the rest of the team all traveling by train. Again, low-key, off the grid as much as they can. Most of them are sleeping. But we see this a lot in some scenes when they're together where she probably should be resting and she just can't, I'm sure. But just as she tries to doze off, they all start to see flashes of Niall. They're all jolted up at once, and we learn that this is something that they go through when a new immortal is essentially born.
Yeah.
And it can happen at any time for any reason. Nobody knows why it happens. It just does.
Yeah. I guess it's like when the first death of an immortal is when they're able to see it.
We start to draw that conclusion later in the film, but no one has made that connection yet.
Right. They just know it's like
because
they all know that when there's another one out there.
Exactly. They know there's another one. They know they need to find the other one. But that whole only another one is born when another one's about to die. They don't know that because they've never really been around another immortal that's died except Andy. So it's not something we immediately draw a conclusion about for sure. Andy is very upset though.
Yeah.
She's like, look, why fucking now? This is not cool.
After 200 years.
200 years. Why now? Nikki wants to find her immediately, and Booker tries to talk him, we got to stay on the path. And Nikki's like, you remember how it was. We have to find her. We have to get to her as quick as we can. And then Joe actually is a very skilled artist, and he has drawn exactly what he saw, and so it'll make her easier to find. Andy eventually agrees and says, I will go get her, because if she's seeing us, we're a beacon. She's going to be a beacon. As soon as they start poking and prodding at her, she might talk about us, and we can't let that happen.
I have a note about the sketch that Joe comes up with of Niall. So there are close-ups that you see of just like his hands drawing it, and that those shots are actually the hands of Leonardo Fernandez, who was the original comic artist drawing out that sketch.
Cool.
So that's actually a sketch from him.
Oh, cool.
I thought that was a really nice touch.
Very nice, yeah, because it's very detailed. Yeah. She tells Booker and everybody to go to France. She'll meet them there. They have a safe house is basically what we get to. And she takes the drawing and literally hops off the train because she can do that. We are then back at the camp with Niall, and the other soldiers are talking about, she totally died, and they can't explain why she's alive. They do enter the med tent, though, and say hi to her and ask to see the trophy, but there's nothing there because, again, she is the new immortal. She kind of tries to make it sound like it was, a skin graft, something easily explainable.
Because Niall at this point doesn't know what she is or what's going on.
No.
She's as surprised as everybody else, but she doesn't know how to properly explain it, so she kind of tries to come up with some excuse.
Right. So. And immediately, I think it's really shitty the way these women turn on her.
Absolutely.
On a dime.
Because she immediately becomes the outcast. Just
right.
because of something that nobody can understand.
Again, yes, it's the I can't understand it, so I have to not like it theory, which is stupid. Yeah. We then cut to a large conference, and it is for pharmaceutical company. We'll learn is Merrick. The company and its CEO, like you said, Harry Melling, is Stephen Merrick, and he's basically just going on and on about how this company is doing good work and they need money and blah, blah, blah. Not going to get into the whole big pharma thing in this episode. He then introduced his lead scientist, this super famous doctor, yada, yada. We then see Copley show him the video while they're in a, SUV together leaving the conference. And Merrick says, well, there's my proof, but I need DNA. This could be just a snuff film at this point. I need actual physical evidence. Copley's like, look at the video. The carnage was just insane. There's no way normal people would have walked away from this. But he's like, nope, I want them all. You're going to have to go capture them. So get it done. We then cut back to Niall. She's feverishly working out her anger and issues probably. She is then told she's being transferred to Germany for more tests. Which, again, not true, I'm sure, in the long run.
Yeah.
Again, she goes to pack up her stuff, and all her bunkmates just won't even say anything to her or look at her, and it's just so shitty.
Yeah.
I hated that. I hated how alienated she already is for no reason.
And considering how close that they show that they all are in the beginning.
They have to be.
Yeah.
Women, A, women in military, B, close women together working in tandem. I mean... Yeah, I'm sure they were with each other for years. Yeah. Maybe. Anyway, we see her sit down. She's supposedly waiting for this plane to fuel. She pops in some headphones to try to calm down. And I'll say it here. The soundtrack is fucking fire.
I thought it was all right.
Every song is so good.
I wish it would have just been more original scores from time to time. There's one scene where Charlize Theron is about to she at this point I don't want to get into that yet because we haven't gotten to it yet, but she's about to go in and just lay waste to a bunch of goons, and then this
that's my favorite song.
I thought it would have been a little bit better had it been just an original action score done by some composer, but I don't know.
I think the way they do choose to use music in certain ways is the brilliant part.
I gotcha.
I downloaded the soundtrack the first time I watched it just to have it. There are original songs on the soundtrack.
Yeah.
But they're not your traditional action sequency songs by any means. But anyway, it's fire. I love it. I think it's just another amazing part of this movie that was done so well. We then see Andy sneak up behind some soldiers who are going to take Niall, and she just obviously knocks them all out in seconds and kidnaps Niall. We then see her driving down the desert in a Humvee. Niall's in the back, unconscious at first. As soon as she wakes up, though, she tries to escape because, of course, she has no idea what's going on and just assumes she was kidnapped, which is totally valid. As soon as she gets out, though, Andy tries to tell her to stop, but she won't. So she shoots her in the back of the head.
This whole
easiest way to go.
It's just here is this person that just is finding out still has no idea as to what's going on. Just know that she died and is not dead anymore, and just is getting kidnapped by this random woman, and just got shot in the back of the head in the middle of the desert.
Yep. And just as Andy walks up on her body, she says, "Why does it have to take so damn long the first time?" Yeah. And Niall slowly regains consciousness and then flips out because you shot her. Andy says, "I know. I need you to get back in the car, though, please." Then Niall stabs her right in the shoulder, and she pulls that out and says, "Please don't do that again. If you want answers, get back in the car." you know, I'll let you know what's going on, basically. Because what else is she going to do?
Right.
She doesn't know what's happening. She's also in the middle of the desert, so she's kind of fucked either way.
Yeah.
They do arrive to a plane, though, again, in the middle of the desert, low-key. And Andy gives Niall some clean clothes. She calls Booker to tell him that she has gotten her and she'll see them in Paris. Niall's like, I'm not going to Paris. She's like, yeah, you are. And you're going on this sketchy-ass plane with me. So, plane takes off. Of course, Niall has a ton of questions. Andy tries to explain what's happening to her, and at first she's like, why me? And she's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And Niall's like, I thought you said I'd have answers. And she's like, I didn't say you'd like them.
Yeah.
I just try to explain this as best I can. So then she starts to pray. Niall does, because the plane's ghetto as fuck, and it's just rocking back and forth. Andy pokes fun at her and says, God doesn't exist. That's not going to work. And then she's like, well, my God does. And she's like, well, if you already believe in the supernatural, just keep believing that, basically. And, you know, I didn't cut your neck, but you're still here. So obviously, you know, this isn't a normal occurrence. She tells Niall to get some sleep, and she rolls over. I don't know if Andy actually got a ton of sleep, because we then see her wake up, and she is tied up. And Niall is trying to make the pilot turn around by holding a gun to his head. Andy said she's not going to shoot him. Niall's like, how do you know that? She's like, because I am, and shoots the pilot. She makes Niall think they're going to crash. Niall starts freaking out. And Andy says, well, I guess we did need a pilot then. Well, I can fly the plane, so cut me loose. She cuts her loose, and she says, you don't speak Russian, do you? Niall says, no. And then the pilot kind of slowly gets back up, and she's like, I didn't shoot him. I told him to play dead. At this point, Niall's pissed. This is the first scene of a fight between two women, and they go at it pretty hard.
Again,
I think Niall holds her own a little bit, though,
again,
for sure.
choreography is just on point.
Yeah, so good. But Andy does break her arm and breaks her leg.
Yeah.
And then she's down, and she says, look, you're already healing faster. And Niall sees her bones literally popping back into her body. So she knows this is happening. This is real. This is going on. Niall then is like, look, I'm a Marine. I have family. I have people that are going to look for me. And Andy's like, well, you're not a Marine anymore. And they are going to lock you up and poke and prod you. So you can either stick with us or not. You know, you'll die, basically, is what she's saying. We then see them both arrive in Paris to the safe house. Well, just outside of Paris, because Niall makes a comment about that. It is an abandoned church. The rest of the guys are there, and they all welcome her. They're all trying to be as friendly as they can and not freak her out, obviously. Niall then asks if they're good guys or bad guys, and Joe says it kind of depends on the century, and we just try to fight for what we think is right. You know, that's what we've always done. Niall also asks why they're all in her dreams, and Nikki says it's almost like fate. It's like how we find each other, and then once we're together, we don't dream about each other anymore. Nikki says the last one was 200 years ago, and that was Booker. And Booker says, I died fighting Napoleon. And she's like, Napoleon?
No,
how the fuck?
He fought with Napoleon.
Sorry.
Yeah.
He died fighting with Napoleon, didn't he?
Yeah,
that's how he died?
like on Napoleon's side.
Yeah, with Napoleon. Yeah.
Sorry, I thought
And
you originally said that he fought against Napoleon.
No, died fighting
Yeah,
with
my
Napoleon
bad.
is what I said. Apologies if I wasn't very clear.
No, you're good.
But she's like, Napoleon, holy fuck, like 200 years, you're old as fuck. So how old is everybody else? And they kind of go around the table. And Joe and Nikki were fighting in the Crusades. They actually killed each other and then fell in love. But they all said Andy's the oldest. She's older than all of us. She might even be older than all of us combined. They don't actually know how old she is. Andy also explains that they're mostly immortal, but we can die because one day your wounds just don't heal, and they don't know why, and they don't see it coming. Niall says, well, if I can die and you shot me, you could have killed me. And Andy's just like, nah, you're too new. That's not going to happen. Joe says, look, there's a lot to understand, but everyone should just get some sleep. And definitely you, because you've traveled a long way. And he shows her to a small area where they can rest. Again, we see another instance of everybody else is sleeping except for Andy. Mm-hmm. And Niall shoots straight up and scares everyone else because she insists she was having a dream and it scared her. Nikki kind of gets the vibe that he understands it too. So maybe they do have the same dreams for a little bit, in general. I don't know. But Nikki's very sweet to her and says, no, tell us what it is. Let's talk it out kind of thing. And Niall says, I keep dreaming of a woman locked in an iron coffin at the bottom of the ocean. And she's screaming and dying over and over. This
is my worst fucking nightmare. I'm already afraid of drowning. That's my number one fear. I do not like going in the ocean. But
me too. The ocean freaks me out.
The idea of being trapped in an Iron Maiden and just not being able to move, dying and drowning over and over and over again.
For hundreds of years. And you're at the bottom of the ocean. It is pitch black down there.
That's literally hell.
You can't
That's
see.
just hell.
Yeah.
It is hell.
You can't see anything.
Yeah.
And all the shit that we don't even know what's at the bottom. Imagine that. She's in this thing. There's things crawling on her, going in and out. Oh, God. The worst. The absolute worst. So, Nikki says her name was Quinn. She was the first immortal Andy found after she was an immortal, and it was just the two of them for centuries. And unfortunately, eventually they were caught. They were caught in England trying to free witches from being burned. And of course, they didn't die, so that just proved to humans that they were actually witches. So they just tried to keep killing them over and over again, which also would have been fucking terrible.
Yeah.
Just the most awful thing ever. They eventually do separate them, and like we said, Quinn is forced into this Iron Maiden coffin and dropped to the bottom of the ocean. Andy tried to look for her when she eventually escaped, but how the fuck would you even find her, you know?
Yeah.
Nikki says she even tracked down people on the ship, tried to get them to take her there. The ocean is just so vast. Where the fuck would you even start?
Apparently, the character Quinn is an adjustment from the character Noriko from the comic, who was Japanese.
Right.
But the actress Veronica No, I think it's NGO is how it's spelled, is her last name. She's Vietnamese, and so she approached the filmmakers and was like, hey, is there any way that we can accommodate this? And they were like, absolutely. So they kind of changed the character from Noriko to Quinn and made her Vietnamese instead of Japanese. So I thought that was pretty cool, making it so.
Yeah, very cool. Definitely very cool. Nonetheless, though, Andy spent decades trying to find her. On the way Nikki describes it, she would just live on boats and just go all over the ocean, mapping everything, and just never found her, which is also very sad. You could tell that her and Andy were close too in some of the flashbacks we see throughout the movie. Nikki says this is why we dread capture. And, Niall says, well, I can feel for her. I feel her going crazy, and that would be terrible. Nikki says 500 years or so in a tomb at the bottom of the ocean. Obviously, anybody would go fucking nuts. Yeah. And he's right. That would be so terrible. Niall kind of goes outside to, again, catch her breath, reevaluate. This is just so much being thrown at her at one time. And Andy follows her out. Niall says, look, I don't want this. I don't want to be here. And she's like, well, it's happening, whether you like it or not. This is your life now. And those three men and I will keep you safe. And we're kind of all you've got. So we're a team. And let's, she tries to tell her we need to stick together. And she tries to voice some empathy. And I think in this instance, there's just nothing you could really say to make this better. We then see a team of men starting to storm the church. Andy and Niall hear a couple gunshots as they're outside. They run back in, and they see Booker again, the guts hanging out. He is fucked up. And she tells Niall to go clear the back room because they can't see Joe or Nikki, so she has to see if they're back there and find them. She is yelling at Booker basically to wake up and eventually slaps him, and he does wake up. And again, just remember, they can feel everything.
Yeah.
So his entire middle section is basically ripped open. His shit is pouring out. It's just, the pain.
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
And he like plays it off like he's clearly in pain when he does wake up, but he's just like,
Oh, yeah.
God, I would be screaming. And I
Me
feel like
too.
any normal person would, but of course, as you mentioned, you know, their pain tolerance is probably built up significantly over the course of however long they've been.
It would
all
have
doing
to
this.
be, right?
Yeah.
Like, how else would you get by? She asks Booker, though, where Joe and Nikki are, and he says, I don't know, I jumped on the grenade and it all went black. So I'm like, you jumped on a grenade? Good God.
And he still managed to land in that chair.
Yep, got thrown back into that chair. Andy says, look, all right, well, they're coming back for all of us, and they clearly took Joe and Nikki. So wait for my signal. I'm going to go take care of this. Now I was like, what's the signal? And Booker's like, you'll know what the signal is. And again, this scene we kind of talked about earlier, but there's another team of men coming in, I'd say 7 to 8. And she is waiting up in, again, it's a church. There's a giant statue towards the ceiling. She's kind of behind it. And again, this scene always gives me the chills. It's just so well done. The choreography, we just can't say it enough, is so great. And again, a mix of old and new ways to take all these men down at one time by herself.
For sure.
We then see Niall, or she's like, we got to help her. You know, there's a bunch of people in there probably. And Booker's like, that's not the signal. Just wait. We then see Copley, and I just wrote down Merrick's bodyguard. I didn't catch his name.
I didn't either.
Yeah, I didn't care. And Copley's like, we need to leave now because he can see, you know, all these guys being taken out. There's a huge explosion, and Booker says, all right, that's the signal. We can leave. And they walk through the church, and Niall just sees all these bodies, and she's like, Andy did all this by herself? She's just like in fucking pure shock. And Booker's like, that woman could kill armies. She knows so many ways to kill a person, honestly. Wouldn't matter. They all hop in a car, though, and take off. But they do not get Joe and Nikki back. We cut to Joe and Nikki, and they're clearly captured in a van. And Joe is trying to wake up Nikki because clearly they were killed. Joe woke up first.
Yeah.
Nikki does wake up, though, but one of the goons in the truck is laughing at him and says, is this your boyfriend? And I wrote this down word for word because I fucking love this speech.
It's really good. Yeah.
It's so good. It makes me tear up every time. But Joe looks at this man and this dude and says, this man is more to me than you can dream. He's the moon when I'm lost in darkness and warmth when I shiver in the cold. And his kiss still thrills me even after a millennia together. His heart overflows with the kindness of which the world is not worthy of. He's not my boyfriend. He's all of that and more. And it's so beautiful.
It is.
And
yeah.
the relationship they have is, you know, and Nikki immediately goes, you're an incurable romantic. And they kiss. And it's just
all the guards are just
so
kind of
great.
like, damn. And then they kind of
Yeah.
like, and then they just pull them apart.
And again, to just mention this, I'm married. I have been with my husband for 10 years. That's a decade. A millennia is 100 of those. I honestly don't know if I could be with him for a millennia. But I like to think the way he loves Nikki is, you know, how it's just so great and beautiful. And I love that they put this in the movie. I think it's perfect.
Yeah. Apparently it was really important to the writer Greg Rucka to have this kind of carry over from the comics, this really like the romantics between Joe and Nikki. And so it was important for them to carry over. And it ended up, you know, a lot of people who, from what I've seen, you know, critics and audience members alike, really liked that they weren't, you know, for having the first real openly gay superheroes. I just realized like my light back there is dying, I think. But like having the first like openly gay superheroes on the screen is, this is the first. I mean, we've had, I think, superheroes in the past that are gay, but this is like the first time that they're like openly gay on screen.
Are there any male gay superheroes?
Trying to think.
I'm sure there are.
I know
but I
Green
can't think of
Lantern in
any.
the comics, I think one of them was, but I don't know. That's just something that I saw, like audience reaction, that people were really fond of having openly gay characters.
Yeah, there's definitely been some gay characters. The chick from Thor, the Valkyrie, she's gay. There's some women gay characters that I can think of in superhero movies. I don't know of any men. So again, yes, having that, not only a gay relationship, but a homosexual man relationship, I think was really great to pull into this film. Because you could have easily just written it as Andy and Booker.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they didn't. So good on you. That was a great call. Because their love in this movie is just something to be marveled at. Whether you're in a relationship or not, it's
For
beautiful.
sure.
So we then see the van pull up to an airstrip, and just as the back door is open, Nikki kicks a guy out. They have killed everyone in this van. And that's what you get for making fun of them.
Yeah.
So Nikki says, well, I guess getting these chains removed is out of the question.
But I like how they like were
obviously-
able to kill all of these guards, and the only thing binding them is just a pair of zip ties. Like, really, man? Like, you couldn't have just like snapped your wrists and just pulled them out. But
I don't think they're zip ties. I think they're definitely a metal.
Oh, they look like zip ties from what I saw, but maybe they are. But
they can break all the bones in their body, so who cares?
Right? Yeah.
Maybe it was like I can do this with my hands tied.
Yeah.
It
was
kind
probably
of thing.
them proving a point. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Because as soon as they get pulled out, they're also kind of quippy with Copley, and Nikki says, we're usually a better judge of character. This is on us. And then Joe says, you'll pay for this for sure. But then just as they enter the plane, Joe says, Nikki, there's a TV in here, which is just funny to add into that scene for sure. We then cut back to Niall and Booker and Andy. They arrive at another safe house location, and this one's special. This is an abandoned mine. And Andy has hidden stuff here over the years, and it's super cool because there's tons of old weapons, there's art, and then Niall actually finds an original Rodin, which is a very old, famous sculptor. And Niall asks Andy if she knew him, and Booker says, probably biblically, and kind of pokes fun at that. And she basically hits him and says, look, get to work finding Copley. We then cut to Merrick Pharmaceuticals, where Joe and Nikki are being dragged in there and introduced to Merrick himself. He initially kind of tries to be nice to them, but he's kidnapped them, so obviously they give no fucks, and Joe just headbutts him. Merrick says, I saw the video, but I need my evidence to be indisputable. And he starts stabbing Joe a bunch of times, which is like, fuck you, bro.
Yeah.
There's not an instance in this movie that I didn't fucking hate this guy.
Yeah, he's got that real punchable face too. I'm sorry, Harry Melling, but yeah.
For sure. You do. I think no matter what you do to that guy, his face, I would be like, I want to fucking punch you. Yeah. But the famous doctor's standing there, and he kind of says to her, well, what do you think? And she says, I think we're looking at the Nobel Prize. And again, barf. Merrick says, look, I did tons of studies over the years on mice. I didn't ask their permission, and I'm definitely not asking for yours. And then which is also disgusting because they're people. They then stab Joe and Nikki with some sort of sedative and take them away.
Yeah, because the whole thing is like, oh, they're trying to make some drug that's going to make everybody immortal, but he's just doing it for money. He couldn't give less of a shit about humanity in general.
No, definitely not. We're then back with Niall, Booker, and Andy. Andy's kind of getting impatient because Booker can't find Copley. Niall suggests, why don't you look for the money trail? That's usually where everything ends up. Booker says, well, I did that, but I can try again. We then see Andy reach up to her shoulder, and her wound here is not healing.
Yeah.
So we now know that's a bad sign. She tells him she's going to go out for a bit, and Niall then tries to burn her hand in the fire. But
it's like she needed more proof than she's already seen that she's immortal. It's
right.
Like, why?
I don't, right. And then Booker's like, yeah, it still hurts. Like,
like it hurt when you broke your arm on that plane. It hurt when you broke your leg. I'm sure you felt it when you got stabbed in the throat, but I'm going to go ahead and just stick my hand in this fire. I wonder what'll happen.
Right. The same thing's going to happen. You're going to burn. It's going to hurt. It's just going to heal. She then asks Booker, why us? Why does this happen to us? And he says, I don't know, but I do wonder why you and why now. She again asks how old Andy is, and he's like, I don't know, and I don't think she knows now. I think she's trying to forget that, for sure. He then kind of asks Niall about her life. He says, do you have family, anything like that? She tells him she does. I've got a brother and a mom. She tells him she wishes she could talk to them again. Or, wants to talk to them again, I think, at this point. And he says something that, again, is very heartbreaking. And he tells the story of his sons. He had 3 and how they died. Because everyone you know is going to die. And you won't. If you try to be in their lives, they learn your secret because you are not aging. And then they want you to share it with them because they don't want to die either. And of course you can't because you don't know. We don't know why this is happening to us. But it's us and it's not them. They'll tell you horrible things that you've never loved them. And then the only thing you're going to remember about the people you did love is how much hate they had when they were, dying. And you can't do anything to help them. He says, basically, you don't want to go through that. You don't want to lose people like that. So it's best to move on. Let them think you died, something along those lines. And I thought that was just really sad.
Yeah.
Something, I'm sure that was hard to go through.
Yeah.
For sure.
The actor who plays Booker in an interview mentioned that he didn't specify in the interview because he didn't want to spoil it at the time, that there was a particular scene that convinced him to do this movie. And if I were to guess, I would say it would have to be this scene. He never specifies, but given his performance and just the writing, I can totally see how this would be the scene that makes him want to do this movie.
I know what scene it is, and it's not this one.
Oh, so close.
But it's in my fun facts. Okay. But this is a very touching scene, obviously. Very, they're still people. They're human. They have emotions. They care about things. Right. As hardened as you probably can try to be over being alive for centuries, it probably doesn't take away from the fact that you just care about things,
right.
We then see Andy in a drugstore. She's looking for stuff to patch her up, and she's not sure what to grab because obviously she hasn't done this before, so she's just throwing a bunch of shit in her basket. As she gets up to the counter, she's kind of looking around. She asks if there's a bathroom, and the girl behind the counter says no, but we have a storeroom. And she also is very sweet and asks her if she needs some help. And then we just see this stranger patching her up, and Andy looks at her and says, you haven't asked. And she says, I don't need to know. That's your business. Today I help you, and tomorrow you can help someone up when they fall. We're not meant to be alone, and we're meant to help people. And you can see the look on Andy's face where she's like, okay, there's still some good in the world somewhere. But then she gets to her car, and we see a flashback of the immortal that did die. And he was with her and Quinn. And that loss was so awful to both of them, and obviously terrible to witness that, again, just emotional. There's a lot of emotion in this movie with all these characters. We then see Copley back at Merrick Pharmaceuticals. He's telling Copley that they're going to keep Joe and Nikki here under lock and key for however long it takes, but he needs everybody else, so you have to find everybody else. This is kind of intercut with clips of that fucking doctor cutting at Joe and Nikki, and basically is like saying, this will be the cure to saving the world. And Nikki says, we've heard that before.
Yeah.
You know, we've been here for centuries. We're immortal, and that's all there is to it. You're never going to find what you're looking for. She leaves, and Joel kind of... Oh, sorry, didn't mention this. Joe was not awake yet. Yeah. But he does jolt up from his unconscious state, and Nikki tells him, as much as I love to see you sleep, I'm glad you're awake, because this is freaking me out being here. And then he tells Joe, I was thinking about that time we were in Malta. And Joe says, what time in Malta? And Nikki kind of looks at him and goes, oh, that time in Malta. Again, just such a fun thing to include in this movie. Their relationship is so great. Nikki says we should go back there. And Joe says we will. We will go back there. We cut back to Niall, again, kind of being jolted out of sleep. She walks outside, and it's about daylight at this point, and Andy has her phone. And Andy says, is this your mom and your brother? Showing her the phone. And she asks where her father is. And Niall explains that he was killed in action in 2011. And she kind of goes into the story of how her mom, was so devastated by the loss of their father. But they were growing up in the bad parts of Chicago, and it could have gone either way, but her mom always kept her and her brother safe and grounded, and her joining the military obviously was in her father's footsteps. Niall says, well, I guess time steals everything, because Andy mentions that she can't remember her mother or her sisters or anything about her life. And again, so sad. It would just be a very sad thing to go through.
Yeah.
And Andy says, no, time doesn't steal everything. Time leaves what you can't forget. And that's the hard part. Andy again mentions Quinn at this point and how she broke the promise to her and stopped looking for her, and feels guilty about that still to this day after probably hundreds of years. But she's not going to let that happen to Joe and Nikki. She's going to get them back, whatever it takes. Booker pops up, though, and says he found something, and it's just outside of London. And Andy takes Niall's phone again, and they head out. So she's been keeping her phone this whole time, I assume. We then see the three of them pull up to this house, and they kind of gear up to go in. Booker hands Andy a gun, and then Andy tells him to go around back. Andy hands Niall a gun, and Niall's like, I can't do this. And Andy says, yeah, you can. You're one of us. It's going to be fine. We would do the same for you. And Niall says, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to kill people. They condition us to do that, but it doesn't really help when you have to. You still are taking a life. And she goes, look, my family's going to get old and I won't, but I still have years with them that I can spend with them. And Andy sees this and feels probably terrible that, it's a different time too. So maybe leaving your family is harder than it probably was for Andy. Andy says, all right, fine, here you go. Take the gun. When you ditch the car, also ditch the weapons. I'll be fine. Booker and I will be fine.
It's kind of real convenient timing, though, that she decides to just bail right as they're about to take siege,
Obviously not great, but it is what it is,
Yeah.
Andy clearly at this point, though, feels that empathy again that I'm saying. She has it.
Right.
And it's there. And she basically tells Niall, you should have a life. So I get it. Take off. Here you go. Niall leaves, and Andy and Booker enter the house. We then see Niall pull off the road, and she goes to ditch the weapons, but notices the gun Andy gave her is not loaded. Dun, dun, dun! So she knows something's wrong.
Yeah.
She gets back in the car, turns back around. We then see Booker and Andy. Booker and Andy enter the house. It's Copley's house. Copley is there standing in front of this, the only way to describe this is serial killer boards on police stations with the thread and pictures. Yeah.
I'm just
That's
imagining
exactly
that scene from Always Sunny where Charlie is piecing everything
yes.
together.
That is the scene for sure. Andy kind of sees all this though and is what the fuck is going on? And before she can really do anything, Booker fucking shoots her.
Yeah.
And then he restrains her, and she loses her shit because she immediately knows he did this too. He sold us out, and rightfully so. She should be fucking livid.
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
Your best friend for 200 years, basically.
Just imagine how, like, you feel when you're betrayed.
Yeah.
And imagine that over hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Like, trusting each other, being with each other. It's insane. Copley just tries to go into this whole spiel, though, about how she can end suffering. And she's like, why? Why would you think we could do this? And she's yelling at Booker, too, at the same time. And he says, look, if they can find out how we're still living, maybe they can figure out how we can die and get out of this. And he thought that's what Andy wanted. And she's like, no, definitely not. And definitely not like this. So Booker then notices, though, he shot her kind of in the stomach, but through the back. Mm-hmm. So the bullet came out. He probably very precisely shot her in a way that the bullet wouldn't be in her, abdomen.
But at this point, he doesn't know that she is, not healing anymore until, a few seconds later when he notices that the bleeding's not stopping. And
that's exactly what happens. He tells Copley, get a towel. She's not healing. And Copley's like, why is she not healing? And he's like, we don't know. It just stops one day. And he's like, you stop being immortal? And Booker's like, yeah, get a fucking towel. Like, But just then, Merrick and his goons come in. And Copley tells him, hey, she's not healing. And Booker just repeats, she's not immortal anymore. She's not healing. You should let her go, though, because she's not going to be helpful to you. But obviously no one fucking listens to him. Yeah. And they drug them both as well and take them away, too. Copley also protests, though, and says, you shouldn't take her. If she's not immortal anymore, this will be murder. You will be murdering a person. And Merrick's basically like, fuck it, and punches Copley and they leave. Yeah. Because he doesn't fucking care. We then see all of them in the lab now. And Merrick wants Andy kept alive at all costs. So the doctor is trying to, like, patch her up and, stuff like that. Nikki kind of looks over, though, and says, look, everything dies. And if it's Andy's time, there's nothing you can do to save her. It's not going to work. But, again, Merrick gives no fucks and tells the doctor to keep going and let him know when she has results. We then see Niall enter Copley's house, and she demands to know where everybody is. And he's like, who the fuck are you? And she shoots herself in the foot.
Yeah, I was like, out of all the ways you could have gone about explaining the situation, why? Why do you choose to shoot yourself in the foot? Knowing it's going to be painful. It's like you couldn't have just, like, if you were going to do that, you couldn't have just, like, nicked your thumb or something and just showed it that it heals real quickly.
Like, break a finger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she shoots right through a fresh pair of Timbs, too. That's the worst crime of this.
It clearly is. Not the murder. Yeah. But as soon as she does, Copley's like, holy shit, another one. Like, So he feels bad at this point, and he's like, okay, they're all in this lab, but Merrick, the guy who took them, and I sold them out to, essentially, is only interested in her mortality, not what she's done with it. And then he starts to explain his serial killer board and everything in Niall that Andy has done over, thousands of years. She'll save a life, and 2 to 3 generations later, people do amazing things. They cure disease. They save an entire town. They start governments. There's just so much good that she has really, her and her team have really done over these years. And Niall is like, you saw all of this and you still gave them up. And she almost shoots him. Yeah. I swear she had that look in her face like, I'm going to fucking kill you too. But then he starts talking about his wife, and she had ALS, which is, I will say, a very slow and painful and fatal disease. And I'm sure that's terrible to watch someone you love go through that. And this was supposed to be a gift to the world to cure diseases like that, which in the reality of things, if you were an immortal person, there may be something in your DNA that you could make a vaccine or something. You might not be an immortal person, but disease-ridden genes in your body, you may be able to clear out of your body, I guess. We don't know. It's not real. So just speculating. Don't come for me. I'm just throwing it out there. So she's like, look, it wasn't your gift to give, though. So where the fuck are they? How do I find them? He says, well, why would the immortality stop? And Niall says, what? And he's like, Andy, she got hurt. She wasn't healing. And she's like, is she alive? Like, did she die? And he's like, no, but I know where he took everybody. And he does take her to the lab. And he gets her in. He initially tries to go with her, but she's like, nah, I'm going to walk out of here. You won't. So you got me here. Just get out and, I'll fix all of this. He tells her there's a private lab on the 15th floor. That's where she wants to go. She gets in the elevator, gets up there. She eventually gets to her first, I would say, line of defense, and they immediately shoot her.
Yeah. Again, she could have just been like, she's a Marine. She could have been real sneaky about it and easily taken them out. We see that she's landing headshots left and right without any trouble. But we also had that whole speech before where she's like, yeah, I don't want to kill people. I don't like it. But she's like clearly fine with it now. And just like,
yeah, I think part of that is probably her training kicking in. And she's like, I got to save these people. So I'm doing bad things to do a good thing, maybe, is how she's justifying it. We have to assume that's what it is.
Yeah.
But, of course, they shoot her. She's down. The lead goon guy is like, well, check the body for ID. Because he can see this all on camera, too. And they kind of walk over to her, kick her. But then she pops up and shoots both of them. And the lead goon guy is like, fuck, there's another one. Like, I think the realization when they find out there's another one is always pretty funny.
Yeah.
We then see Andy, Joe, and Nikki, and Andy has told Joe and Nikki at this point about Booker and his betrayal, and Joe is losing his shit. He's not having it. Nikki's mad too, but I think Joe takes this in a different manner than I think all of them really do. But I would too. I would feel, I'd be fucking pissed.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We then see Niall taking on a bunch of bullets, and she's trying to make her way to the lab to get everyone, and eventually she does. She unhooks them all, but Andy first, she kind of gets her first and says, you came back, why'd you come back? And she's like, do whatever it takes, right? I'm just here to get y'all out of here. So she goes to unlock Booker, and Joe yells at her to leave him there. Again, he's so angry.
Yeah.
But Andy walks over to him and says, no, this isn't the time. We can't choose how we die, but we can choose how we live. And she turns to Booker and goes, we've been doing a shit job of it. We should be doing better with our lives. And we all need to stick together now and take this guy down because he will never stop hunting us. So they all go out again. They're kind of blocking Andy, though, because obviously they know she can be hurt now. And again, beautifully choreographed fight scenes as they're getting through this lab to get up to Merrick. And it's just great. Everything about it's great. Again, precision, the movements. And this is the scene I was going to come back to. Nikki fires a gun. I can't remember where the shotgun came from. If it was on it was on the floor. He slides it to Joe. Joe slams it on the ground at the same time he shoots somebody in the face.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's so great.
It's good.
Like, everything about it. Obviously, they're taking all the bad guys down as they go through. Just then, though, unfortunately, there's a huge explosion and everybody goes flying. Obviously, Andy's hurt more than everyone else. But again, like a complete badass that she is, gets up and carries on with the rest of them.
Yep.
At first, Booker, Niall, and Andy are kind of out of the room, and they left Joe and Nikki behind, but I don't think they realized it right away. And the main goon comes in and shoots Nikki right through the fucking mouth.
Yeah.
Which is awful. I'm glad they didn't show it, honestly.
That would have been rough.
Yeah. But Andy, Niall, and Booker are then kind of pinned down in a room and taking fire. Andy kind of looks up, though, and sees a fucking fire axe and is like, yep.
Yep.
This'll work.
Thank you.
Yep. And just goes out and takes, again, 5 to 7 dudes out with this fucking axe. Mm-hmm. And she's very wounded and still is just kicking so much ass. It's amazing.
Yeah.
They eventually all kind of meet up in this hallway. And the guard gives up the location of Merrick. He says he's in the penthouse, the one guard they kind of left alive. Mm-hmm. Joe then says to the group, what do you think, Oslo 67? And Andy says, no, San Paulo 84. Niall's with me. And Niall goes, what happened in San Paulo in 1984? And she goes, 1584. And you'll see. And it's just like, yeah, wrap your head around that for sure. It's crazy. So Andy and Niall get to the door. At first, you think it's the door to enter the penthouse. And Niall's like, look, I'll go first. You got to stay behind me. And tries to get her to put on a bulletproof vest, which would be pertinent.
It'd be the smart move. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't care how badass you are.
Right.
The vest is there to help.
Yeah. Like, you can't, like, she's probably used to taking 1 or 2 bullets casually in the middle of a fight.
Sure.
But at this point, you know, if something lands, then, like, when you're immortal,
what if it lands in her heart?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Like, if you're, you know, the fact that they're immortal, I'm sure they probably have been taking that into account to a certain extent. And so they probably, you know, if they get hit, they kind of just brush it off. And in this case, if something were to happen to her, then she wouldn't be able to recover.
Right.
But
you see that in the previous scene where they're all walking down the hallway fighting together. Joe and Nikki take 6-7 bullets, but just are like, you know, it's like that when you get, like, something just hurts, like your muscle hurts, and you make that, like, jerk movement. That's what they do. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just a muscle pain.
Yeah.
But yeah, if she got shot in the head or the heart, we don't know if she'd survive.
Right.
So, like, put the vest on. That would have been a good call. But Andy says, no, I'll go first. If this ends bad, though, next time, you can go first. Because I'll probably be dead. So then we see all the guards waiting by the door. And the main goon is like, what the fuck are they waiting on? And just then we see Joe fly through a fucking window and surprise all of them. It's either a window or maybe a wall of glass.
I think it's a window because I think it's the same one that they jump out of in the next part of the scene.
It can't be because it's on the very top of that giant building.
Yeah.
So I was thinking maybe it's a wall of glass.
Maybe.
Because it is glass. We see it fly everywhere. Mm. But just then the main goon tries to go stop him. And he says, you shot Nikki and you shouldn't have done that. And he breaks his neck.
Yeah. Like flips him upside down and lands him right on his head.
Again, beautifully choreographed.
Absolutely.
Nikki then notices the elevator's going down, though. And Andy says, all right, go after him. Niall says she'll stay with Andy. Again, Andy's pretty beat up. And Niall asks if she's okay. And she says, you know, everything hurts, but you showed up. And I think you showed up when I lost my immortality to not only show me there are people still worth fighting for, but what it was like to be new and experience the unbreakableness of being immortal. Mm-hmm. She also tells Niall, I know how I want to spend the rest of my time. And Niall says, you'll spend it with us. And you just see this look on her face like, yeah, I will. I'm never going to be alone again because I'm probably going to die soon. But just then, Merrick pops out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. I forgot to mention this. Niall had Andy's axe and dropped it, and he picked it up. So he's got this axe right now in his hands. And he starts screaming at her about how she's selfish, and he goes on this little tirade I didn't bother to really watch. Andy looks at Niall and says, do you think he speaks Russian? And you immediately see Niall go, no, probably not. She shoots Andy. Merrick shoots Niall. But Andy gets up, gets her axe, and fucking slices him right in the neck, almost cutting his head off.
Lands about halfway into his neck. Yeah.
It's like neck to shoulder, that whole area, because this axe, I can't describe. It's huge.
Yeah.
So Merrick shoots his gun again, but Niall tackles him right out the window, and they fall all the way to the fucking ground.
I feel like
into a car.
Probably just could have kicked him out the window, but I know, whatever. She's immortal.
Yeah. Because, the next scene we see, they all arrive down ground level, And Niall's okay, of course. Merrick's dead. Duh. But she looks fucking terrible. Like, it literally does look like she fell from a 15-story window to the ground, for sure. It's crazy. I mean, they all look pretty bad.
Right.
But they're alive. They leave together, but not before Niall gives Andy her axe back. They pull out just as the cops arrive, and we cut to a small riverside pub. I'm going to England in a few months, and this pub is an actual place that is still there, and I'm going to find it.
And it's supposedly like 500 years old, too.
I'm going to find it. It's in downtown London, and that's where we'll be staying.
Prospects of Whitney, I think it is. Yeah.
I did write it down.
Yeah.
And I'm going to find it. And I'll take pictures.
Yeah.
So it's the four of them at a table. Niall, Andy, Joe, and Nikki. And they're basically determining Booker's future at this point. Because what he did was super fucked up. They can't let that go. Niall kind of walks out to, I don't know, maybe their like patio area because Booker's standing there. And he asks how it's going in there. And she says, well, they're still deciding. Niall looks at her phone. And he says, oh, she gave you your phone back. She says, yeah. Copley will make it look like I died in action, so they'll mourn. And she wishes she could talk to them one last time, but this is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Booker says she's a really good kid, and he'll be really good for the team. We then see Booker kind of past the bar, kind of by the ocean or seaside or wherever this is. And Andy come up and talk to him. And she's like, you know, there has to be a price. So 100 years from now, they'll all meet you here today. Until then, you're alone. Booker says he hoped for less, but he definitely expected more. And Andy said Niall was going to let you off with an apology. And they both laugh. They both just look at each other, though, in this moment and look completely devastated.
Yeah.
Because he probably knows he won't see her again. She will probably die before that 100 years is up.
Right.
And he says as much, and she basically is like, hey, don't count me out. But, you know, she does also say, I'm going to miss you terribly. And they hug and kind of cry together. And it's just, just a very emotional scene.
Right.
We then see him kind of left alone as they all walk away from him. We're now back with Copley. And we see all of them looking at Joe, Nikki, Andy, all looking at the stuff he's compiled over the last, you know, however long he's been doing this research. And they're kind of in awe of the fact that he put it all together, and B, how much he really had here, because it's a lot of information. Niall looks at Andy and says, maybe this is the why. And Andy smiles and says, it's almost impossible to disappear in this world today. There's too many phones, cameras. There's too many people like Copley trying to bend what good we do to how they want it. So she says, you're going to help us. You're going to tell every time we leave a footprint, every time there's a picture, anything everywhere in the ether, you're going to erase it, and you're going to protect us from those who want to put us in cages. You're also going to find us jobs that are best suited for us. Joe says, look, we're not asking, and Copley says that he'd be honored to help. Andy then says, well, let's go to work. And that's initially the credits.
Yeah.
But there is an after credit scene. We see on the screen, 6 months later, we see a very drunk Booker stumbling into his house.
Somewhere in France.
And he's met by Quinn. Quinn is there, and she's alive.
She made it out.
She did. Somehow made it out. And that's the movie.
It's pretty good.
I love it.
Yeah, I mean, for a film, because I saw that they started principal photography for this movie back in early to mid 2019, and it released in mid 2020. So I mean, a year of shooting and post production is pretty impressive, because it doesn't seem like this movie was really rushed or anything. You know, It's not like an MCU movie where they just need to keep pumping them out. But I guess
they took their time.
Yeah. So the film was originally, or the film rights were originally purchased by Skydance Media back in 2017. And so it was kind of like 2017 to 2019 was all kind of like pre-production until Netflix picked it up. They got all the cast, but goes to show how much work goes into just pre-production alone. But yeah, I mean, I never read the graphic novel, but from what I understand, it's very faithful adaptation that a lot of fans of the comic really enjoy. Of course, they did make some changes, but what's an adaptation without a few changes here and there? But yeah.
So my fun facts.
Yeah.
I have a bunch.
Let's hear 'em.
Because again,
I'm
like
ready.
I said, I love this movie. So again, the director Gina Prince Blythewood. We're gonna go with that. First Black woman to ever direct a superhero movie. We kind of talked about that at the top. But she made her name in Hollywood doing romantic comedies, romantic movies.
Okay.
And directing a couple of those in television shows with that romantic undertone. She was very excited to get her hands on this when she started directing. Once you kind of look beyond the intense action and chaos, though, of the action portions of this movie, this is very much based around the close-knit bond of its central characters. And again, we talked about this over and over, but I'm mentioning it again. This is best illustrated with the Joe and Nikki relationship. Again, that centuries-long companionship just built up, and it's just great. The aspect of the story, like you said, it was taken from the graphic novel, and the writer, Greg Rucka, we'll go with that, made it a requirement. So just love that again. Charlize Theron trained 4 to 5 hours a day for 6 months.
She doesn't play around.
To be able to pull off a lot of the moves you see here. She repeated movements, she said in a few interviews, 40 to 80 times in order to get it right, including small hand-to-hand combat moves. And they used a real halberd. This is a Norse weapon. It eventually kind of translates into a German area after, obviously, the Norse people are wiped off the planet. This can weigh anywhere from 12 to 15 pounds. So she wanted to be able to move correctly with the right prop, so she used an actual halberd.
Nice.
Yeah. Once the key members of the team kind of sat down and were cast in their respective roles, Gina Prince Blythewood sat down with each of them individually and gave them very specific and different things she wanted them to focus on while preparing to be these characters, which I think shows wonderfully throughout this movie. I don't know what exactly she said to these actors, but whatever she did made each character so well developed. Such a great job they did. It's just amazing, the end result. You mentioned Booker, the actor, being signed on for a specific scene. This was it. The fight scene between Andy and Niall in the plane. It was the very first scene they shot. It was one of the most exciting action sequence in the entire movie, I think, personally.
Yeah.
And it took them 3 weeks to
Really?
shoot. Yes. The movement of the actors plus the plane plus all these different things that came into effect. And, of course, the actor who played Booker, Joe, Nikki, Copley, everybody's watching this happen for 3 weeks. And this is when, yes, Matthias, I won't pronounce his last name, was like, this is why I was here. So he loved it.
That's pretty good.
Charlize Theron revealed that she ended up tearing a tendon in her left thumb.
Yikes.
With only a few weeks left in production. But she didn't want to halt the shoot, so she waited for surgery and was adamant about going on, carrying on with whatever scenes they had left. She also did a lot of her own stunt work, which can be dangerous, and this is why. But she held her ground and waited until the end of production before taking care of the issue. After everything was said and done, she had 3 surgeries on her left arm to repair the tendon because it started to rip up the arm. Yeah.
No thanks.
That would hurt a lot, for sure. Some of what the director learned during the ups and downs of filming this giant action film, essentially, she was slated to produce a Marvel movie called Spider-Man,
Okay.
Silver and Black.
Okay.
It never got made,
Yeah.
apparently, But it helped her a lot with a lot of the scenes for this movie.
Sure.
In a more violent, action-packed way, which she thought was cool. From start to finish, The Old Guard is very much a movie centered around strong female characters. There's obviously a lot of screen time with Andy and Niall in particular, as well as having a female director, of course. But a lot of the production team was women, 85% women, actually. So from start to finish, there's just a lot of women in this movie pushing that envelope even further, which I thought was pretty cool.
Very
nice to add.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are plenty of storylines from the Old Guard comics that could have been enough to just make a TV series. You know, there's 7 or 8 actual novels of them that are all fairly long. Sorry, the source material has 10 issues total. Here's where that came in. Yeah, so there's 10 as of 2020. So he wrote up until 2020.
Okay.
There's already a sequel slated to come out this year. So we will be seeing some more.
Makes sense,
sure.
Given the, how at least the film seems to be pretty. It seems well regarded by critics and the audience. So, and of course they left the first one on a cliffhanger. So we kind of already knew that we were going to get some kind of sequel, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But
for sure. Greg Rucka, who did write the comics, like you mentioned, he was brought on to do screenwriting. He did not get along with Charlize Theron, though.
Really?
And she wanted a lot of rewrites, apparently, after he had already signed on. So they were feuding kind of through the initial part of this movie.
I mean, it's his book, though. I mean,
right. I don't know what particularly she wanted. I couldn't find that information anywhere. But he was eventually fired.
Really?
Yeah, and she brought her own production company in and hired new writers to work on the script.
Did it say why in particular he was fired?
No, they didn't say. I can't find anywhere specifically what happened. Because after she brought her team in, Netflix didn't like the rewrites at all.
Yeah.
So when they finally got Gina Prince Blywood as the director, she hired him back, and him and Charlize kind of had to, bury their hatchet because she wasn't going to fire him. And finally, Charlize Theron's in another very high-octane, action-packed movie called Atomic Blonde. This started shooting in 2016, and this is the first time she was approached with the Old Guard, and she turned it down.
Oh, really?
She was going through a lot of the same very rigorous stunt coordination and doing a lot of her own stunts for Atomic Blonde. Atomic Blonde, also a very good movie. The dialogue and script is kind of garbage, but her acting is just phenomenal. And she, again, does a lot of her own stunt work. She just thought coming off that movie and then going into the Old Guard would be so much work that she didn't want to even mess with it.
Right.
The thing that got her to sign on was the love story between Joe and Nikki.
Nice.
She thought that was very beautiful and agreed to do the movie. I kind of think this movie will become a cult classic for a few reasons. I think the graphic novel comic aspect of it will propel it anyway.
For sure.
Fans of the comic were already really excited to see it on the big screen and adapted this way. And we've said it over and over again. I don't think it failed in any shape or form to tie in the comics really well.
Right.
I think we see a lot more female representation in characters these days, and I think that'll help, project it to a cult status as well. And again, the relationship and character development that we really saw. Even though this is categorized as a superhero film,
it doesn't feel like a superhero film.
No. I think it captures some of the balance between the relationships you have in, like, the Avengers, let's say.
Yeah.
And then the darker tone of, like, Justice League, the obviously Zack Snyder version.
Yeah.
But that just really great mix of how they've seemed to come across that and make this into a really great film. I think it'll be something that people remember for years to come, and, next generations will find it and love it too. So that's why I picked it.
For sure. All right. Well, I think that's going to be about it for this episode of the Cult Cinema Podcast. So,
what are we doing next week?
I have decided that my future cult classic pick is going to be the movie Overlord.
Ooh.
Have you seen it?
You are picking a horror film?
Yes.
I love Overlord.
Okay,
yes, it's
awesome.
wonderful.
Because
it's a lot on par with this movie.
Yeah. Because I remember when it came out, I had not seen like any trailer or like any advertising for it whatsoever. I was like, it was one day, I think I was in high school. I was wanting to go see a movie, but I didn't know what was playing. So I looked and I saw the poster for this and I was like, what the hell is this? I look up the trailer for it. I mean, it's fucking Nazi zombies.
Yeah.
I mean,
and it's probably one of the goriest films I've seen in years.
It's got the perfect blend of action and horror, and it came
out in 2018.
Yeah.
I thought it was much sooner.
Yeah, no, it was 2018. And it's produced by J.J. Abrams, who is one of the biggest names in sci-fi filmmaking right now.
Yep.
And like,
it's a great pick.
Yeah.
Great pick. I'm excited.
I heard like nobody talk about this film. I like heard nobody talk about it since.
I'm gonna have to do research on how that happened, because I don't remember it either.
Yeah, I like had no idea that this was a thing, and I just went to the theater and saw it on a whim, and it's probably one of my favorite like horror films that I've seen.
It's wonderful. Great pick. I'm very excited.
All right.
Again, don't forget to follow us on Instagram. All the things, like and subscribe. You know the drill.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you again, everybody, for tuning in to this episode of the Cult Cinema Podcast, and we will see you in the next one.